The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
Episode 51, Ham Radio 360. We're going to dip our toes into the waters of software-defined radio.
MTCRadio.com presents Ham Radio 360, the podcast, with your host, Cale Nelson, K4CDN.
Welcome into Ham Radio 360. I am Cale, your host, K4CDN, and that sounds kind of cool. Let me say it again. Welcome into Ham Radio 360. I am Cale. Yeah, if this is your first time through, you may not know why that sounds any different than it has in the past. Well, recently, episode 50, we rebranded our site and our podcast name. Now we're known as Ham Radio 360. And we're exploring the hobby in every direction. We started out as the Photime Podcast, and to make a very long story short, it was kind of an inside joke. Some buddies of mine and I were on an internet forum, and we talked about ham radio, and that was an inside joke there, and it kind of bled over to the podcast. And the podcast kind of took a life of its own and became what no one ever anticipated, and that was a worldwide sensation, and you guys have just been all over us, and we really appreciate everybody participating with us, and you can find us online at hamradio360.com. Now, not only there will you find links to this podcast and past episodes, you'll also find links to other folks who are producing content for the amateur radio hobby. So if you're interested in some blogging, some vlogging, other podcasts, just different points of view, maybe some places to buy and sell, maybe you're looking for some new gear, we've got everything listed there. And again, it's hamradio360.com. So the IC7300 may be the most popular radio of our time, or at least it appears that way. People are going nuts over this thing, and we're going to learn a lot more about that radio here in the program. If you're interested in buying an ICOM IC7300 or any ICOM gear, check first with our friends at MTCRadio.com. Let Richard know you heard about him on the Ham Radio 360 podcast, and they'll do their best to give you the best deal on your ICOM gear. It's MTCRadio.com. Now we're going to get down to the meat and taters, as we say in South Carolina. Here comes Gerald and Jeremy. Let's talk about some SDR.
All right, thanks, Cale. Folks, I'm excited to be here tonight with the first full normal episode of Ham Radio 360, and we're finally going to get into a subject that's pretty exciting. Tonight we have Gerald, KF5JNU, a longtime friend and supporter of the show. How you doing, Gerald?
Doing pretty good, Jeremy.
Well, I'm excited because we are finally going to crack the lid on the software-defined radio topic.
And I'm very excited to be cracking that lid, just like a cold can of Budweiser.
So tonight we are going to kind of have a fairly broad, but not necessarily too deep discussion to introduce SDRs and SDR topics. Again, SDRs are software-defined radios. And we're going to end with a way that people can get started at home for about $20, which is probably one of the more exciting parts about all this.
Yeah, I think that's really what, when we get to talking about it, that's what's gotten it so much traction in the amateur radio community is that little $20 stick we're going to talk about.
Yep, it's really the Baofeng of SDR. So, well, let's start with an overview. Tell us, what is software-defined radio?
Okay, and I'm by no means an expert on any of this stuff, so hopefully there's not, some engineer sitting there saying, oh, he didn't, raise to the third modular exponent or something, but we're going to keep it a lot simpler than that. So software-defined radio is essentially just a device that takes the electrical signals out of the air and feeds them to your computer to let the computer software do the processing or the handling of that signal. Conventionally, that's been, a big desktop PC. It's been, your fan-cooled 120-volt computer sitting in your room that had the power to do that. In recent years, PCs have become so powerful. Most people's phones are more powerful than an average PC was, 5-10 years ago. So, laptops really aren't a problem. Raspberry Pis, a $30 single board computer, no problem. And you're even seeing it now. Some of the big three manufacturers are starting to incorporate FPGAs, a little small programmable computer type board with software-defined radios, and they're taking the same form factor as a conventional, knobbed normal radio, but it has all the performance of SDRs inside of it.
So now you kind of specifically mentioned, there's a box that serves as kind of like an analog to digital converter as it gets signal from the antenna. So that definitely covers the receive side, but does the phrase SDR have any meaning when we talk about transmission?
Yes, there are transmitting SDRs. The big name is going to be Flex. Flex Radio has been around the game for a while, and they are a full transceiver SDR. The way that I look at it is receiving is the hardest part. It's the part that you need the best antenna, you need the best coax for not losing line. It's really hard to pull out those weak signals. When you talk about talking, transmitting is transmitting, and it's pretty easy to throw out a powerful signal. But picking out those weak signals is kind of the harder part, or being able to pick out a wide area of signals, being able to, scan. Some other things we'll talk about. Those are kind of the harder parts. So while SDRs are, there are plenty of devices out there capable of transmitting. For the basic, the entry level, stuff like that, you're not going to be transmitting with an SDR, but don't let that discourage you. It's not supposed to be a replacement for your handy talkie. It's a complement. It's something that we're going to add to it.
All right. And, you were talking about receiving, and we'll set transmitting to the side because you're right. The majority of the real magic is really around the reception. But my FT857, which is like a 150-year-old radio, it has a receiver. So why do I care about SDR compared to the radio I have today?
All right. Well, so the biggest, without getting into performance specs, and there's been plenty of write-ups on, specs. I think his call sign is W4RAT. I'll look it up and we can put it in the show notes. He's done a bunch of really good benchtop calibrated equipment type testing on the performance of these things. So, if, the listeners are interested, they can go down that road. But the big difference that I see for an SDR that differs it from your FT857 or Mike Kenwood TS2000 is the fact that, when you turn into a station, let's say you turn into 14.250, your transceiver or receiver at this point, your receiver is going to park itself on, that 3 kilohertz chunk of spectrum right there. And it's just going to be listening to a sideband or AM, whatever modulation you have. And it's just listening to that narrow little spectrum of what you have the radio set to. With an SDR, you're parking on a wide swath of area. If you were to set that, your SDR to 14.250, depending, and we'll talk about instantaneous bandwidth, you could be looking at 13.250 all the way to 15.250, and you could see every signal that pops up in that 10 megahertz. So on your 857, you're only going to hear the traffic coming across on that one frequency that you're set on, as to where with an SDR, you can set it on that frequency, hear all the traffic, but hear and see traffic that's taking place around that signal.
Well, you're talking about seeing traffic and, looking at bandwidth and things, but, let's kind of talk about, because there are, like you said, there are many classes of these things, starting at the lower end of a little USB stick that I can plug into my computer all the way up to, things like the Flex Radio with the Maestro controller that it actually can act as a standalone hardware thing. What is it that I'm doing with my computer? Are there knobs? Where's this display that's showing me all this spectrum?
So yeah, this is probably my most favorite part of the SDRs. I've gotten into the hobby. My main interest in the hobby is tinkering. If somebody just gave me a box and said, "Here you go, you can talk on it," that wouldn't be too much fun to me, and that's just my opinion. What I like is, oh man, there's a signal. I want to figure out how to decode it. So that's why I got to looking at SDR, because exactly what you're saying. You're saying, are there controllers? Is there a screen? Yes and no. The ANAN series, it's another brand of SDR transceiver. there's a lot of guys that use a DJ mixer board like you would see at a DJ club with the turntables, and it's got all the little volume knobs that a DJ would use. Well, some guys have wrote some interface software so that you can use those knobs and sliders and dials to control your SDR. I'm really happy with using a mouse. A lot of people don't like using the mouse. I like it because as soon as I see a signal, I can click on it. I can use my mouse wheel to scroll the frequency up and down. You can use your arrow keys to move the frequency around, or your demodulated frequency around. And the interface that I'm talking about moving this frequency around in is, once again, it's a number of different things. If you're a Windows user, the best, hands down, absolutely unsurpassable software is SDR Sharp. And as a hardcore Linux fanboy, it took me a long time to finally just admit that SDR Sharp was the best and quit trying to go around it other ways. The SDR Sharp community is amazing. The software developer is amazing. The software developer has even created his own hardware that works great. It's just SDR Sharp. If you take one thing away from this, buy one of the RTLs that we'll talk about, download SDR Sharp, and go to town. But then, there's other software that people's written. There's one called SDR Console, which is a free download. SDR Sharp is completely free. SDR Console, completely free. And for HF, it is absolutely amazing. The waterfall, it scrolls down. If you've used any digital modes like PSK or FLDigi, you'll kind of understand what the waterfall is. It's continually cached. So as it's scrolling down and you see a signal pop up, and you were off messing around in another part of the band, or not band, but another part of the spectrum, you can click back on there and it will replay back and rewind to that signal, and you can hear what they said. So for HF, that's really, really great, and that software is kind of tailored towards HF. But maybe you're not a Windows guy, maybe you're not an OS X, or maybe you're OS X or a Linux guy. GQRX is an awesome piece of software that uses GNU Radio. It has a bunch of plugins. It's real simple to get set up. And these, big programs, GQRX, SDR Console, and SDR Sharp, are just a window into the radio. So up until now, people have found signals by tuning around and hearing them. With these software, or with these types of software interfaces, you see signals pop up and you click on them. And free software, is the big goal. I don't think I'll recommend any software tonight that isn't free. I think everything that I'm recommending is all free, and SDR Sharp isn't open source, but it has a plugin infrastructure for it that people write open source plugins. So there's that whole side covered too.
So at its basic, because we'll come back and kind of do a deeper dive on the software here, but so at its basis, I mean, really, these radios fall into two categories, right? There is computer connected, and then there are standalone. So the majority, I think, of what we see out there are mostly computer connected ones today, although that I think is slowly changing. And so it sounds like the components of that is there is some type of an interface that connects to your antenna that captures signals. It does some form of lightweight processing and sends that data into the computer, where you have a software package that will help you visualize or interact with that, listen to things, decode things. And then you have, it sounds like, all kinds of choices for control, from keyboard and mouse all the way to using different MIDI devices, like you mentioned, the DJ mixer type thing, to help control those things. Does that about sum up the components?
Yeah, you hit it right on the head, Jeremy.
Awesome. So on the other side of the spectrum, which is a poor pun, when we do look at the standalone ones, you and I have the good fortune of you and I own a standalone SDR that requires no computer. And what is that?
I hope you're talking about the KX3.
I am.
Otherwise,
it's not an episode of the show if we don't bring up the KX3.
I was going to say, otherwise, we might have to tune out right now and not let my wife listen. But yes, the KX3 is a SDR transceiver, but if you set it down on a table with, at your local ham club, Of course, everyone's going to know what a KX3 is, but they're not going to know that it's a KX3 because it has the knobs, it has the normal LCD display. They're just going to think that it's, a normal radio.
Very good. So, really, in your experience about it, I mean, how long has SDR really been a topic that's been achievable or reachable by the average ham?
Well, ICOM a number of years ago had, I want to call it the RC1000. I've only seen them. I've never actually got to play with one, but it was a serial RS-232 connected device. A lot of guys really liked them, but it was still in that powerful computer type stage. There were still Pentium 2s and stuff floating around. Well, 2011, I want to say, is kind of when you had a paradigm shift, and SDRs became really popular and really easy to obtain.
Yeah, sorry, I was just Googling. I see that there was the IC-PCR 1000, and there was, or is at least, the IC-PCR 1500, which is basically, it's a receiver that's a box that plugs into your computer.
Yep. And does it say what year that first came out?
No, it almost makes it sound like the 1500 might still be under manufacture, but don't quote me on that. All right, well, I think we have done a good job of introducing things. When we come back from the break, we're going to start digging into the individual components more on the computer side, and we'll get into the hardware, the actual receivers or transceivers, some information about what you need for your computer, a little bit of information, deeper dive on the software, and then at the end we'll reserve some time to talk about some more of these standalone transceivers. So we'll be right back.
I'm finding that BridgecomSystems.com produces some of the finest 220 gear available to the amateur radio market. Well, how do I know? I've got their handy talkie. I've got their mobile, and they're both built like commercial rigs. Now, they're easy to program. They're easy to manipulate and get through the menus and adjust the settings, and the VFO works great, all of that. But they're built to commercial standards, and if you're looking for some 220 gear, I would recommend you check out BridgecomSystems.com.
All right, folks, we're back with Gerald Wilson, KF5, Just Not Unique, and we are talking software-defined radios. So let's start deep diving on the components. Let's start off with the boxes, because the boxes that you have that you plug into your computer is awesome, because for $20, I can get started playing with software-defined radio.
Yeah, so this is going to be, the Baofeng of SDRs. The reason I say that is because you're going to buy it off Amazon. It's going to be ridiculously cheap compared to what's been available in the past, and you're going to get smiles and enjoyment out of it. The RTL started life as a digital video receiver decoder, or well, I guess just a receiver for people over in Europe and places that have DVB transmissions. We don't have them in the United States, so you didn't really see them too much here. I want to say 2010 or 11 or around that time is when the Osmocom group started messing with them, and I've never really found like a positive, this is the guy who did it, but at some point people found out how to get what they call the INQ data, the signals from there just straight into the computer. So instead of being tuned just for, the UHF transmission that the TV signal's on, they were able to tune it, from the first ones were around 30 megahertz up to a gigahertz, and tune that receiver chip in there all around and get the signals off of there. And then they started putting it into some rudimentary processors. So if you go onto Amazon right now and you do a search, you're going to see a bunch of different RTLs. You'll see some from a company called Noelec. You'll see some from, Noelec's going to be the big one. They have nice blue anodized cases, and they make a good product.
Yeah,
you'll see.
Let me add to that, because I just found out one of the links that we'll put in the show notes is rtlsdr.com, I think. But they actually have a store and have started having their own RTL boards manufactured. Yeah,
so actually the RTL, that's the one that I'm going to recommend, because with that, these started out just plastic case little chiclets that you plug into your computer, and that's it. And, they've been as cheap as $9, $10. Well, RTL SDR, the blog, is an amazing resource, and the link's got to go into the show notes. And they started taking feedback from all these people of, well, this has got frequency drift, or this one's PPM offset's crazy, or this, and, they all use that little tiny MCX connector. Everyone said we wanted SMA. So they took all those suggestions and came out with their own. And they're on their second revision. Now they're using an aluminum case. They're thermally bonding the tuner chip to that case so that you get hardly any frequency drift as the tuner warms up. It's got a SMA connector on it. It's a good heavy-duty construction. And if you buy the RTL with the antenna combo, it comes with they call it a mag mount. It's not really magnetic, but it is. It's a mag mount base with 2 telescoping antennas. And I'm telling you, the one is, almost 3 feet tall. And it's great. I've used it all the way down to aircraft stuff with no problem. And then there's a shorter one for, cellular stuff. And for $25,
$25, yep.
I know people that would pay that just for the little telescoping antennas. I wouldn't, but I know people that would.
Now, to be fair to people, when we talk about these, are these going to be absolutely the highest sensitivity and the highest performing receivers in the world? Absolutely not. Does it allow? No. But is it a great gateway drug into playing with the spectrum? Absolutely.
Right, and I don't think, it's kind of like the Baofeng. You stick one of those on test equipment and you compare its sensitivity and all that, and it's, QST did their comparison, and it showed up, and it was, if you looked at it just for the numbers, there's no way anyone would buy them. Everybody would go down the street and buy FT60. But look at how many thousands of people have bought them and are completely happy with the performance that they've gotten out of them.
Exactly. So, that's kind of the $20 receive only. And, one of the things I think it's important for us to bring up is that, as you mentioned before, these RTL dongles, their reception range out of the box without getting into doing hardware modifications or anything are approximately, I think, 25 megahertz now up to like 2.2 gig.
So there's going to be 2 variants depending on which actual chip they use. I think the RTL blog store is using the RT820 or R820T, and it's like 24 megahertz to 1.2 gig-ish. Now, since it is software defined, you can click in all that software, ignore hardware limits, and you can tune it up to 2-3 gigahertz. You're not going to have very much performance, but you're capable of doing that. But when we say from 24 megahertz to 1.2 gigahertz, you're getting the full data. So if you look at that, that's the same as saying you're getting a all VHF, all UHF receiver with AM, FM, sideband, CW, adjustable filters out to, however wide a filter you want. It'll be able to pipe you 9600 baud data. It'll be able to pipe 1200 baud data, 4800. You can take this device, and we'll talk about the software later, and you can put it on an APRS gateway and use it for a gateway into the internet. You can take this device and you can listen to your repeater output. It's not, a lot of people are going to think, because they have messed with scanners and stuff, it's just FM, AM, FM. And it is, because sideband is just AM, but it's more of, this is a hardware device. We'll talk about software later. So, and the software is where all the money happens. So think, what can I do from 24 megahertz to 1.2 gigahertz? And that's what you're looking at the hardware.
Now, that brings up kind of a good point, right? Because as we talk about different hardware platforms, and I think we're going to dig a little bit deeper than I was originally thinking on this, because there are so many great and affordable platforms. But when we're starting with the RTL, which again, RTL is just the type of receiver chip or the manufacturer that's not actually a manufacturer of these devices. Again, look at the show notes because we will have links to the things we recommend you buy and where to get them from. But when we're talking about these receivers, there are a few specs that we really care about. And the first one you mentioned is the usable spectrum. In this case, it's 24 megahertz up to 1.2 gigahertz. What are some of the other hardware specs or performance specs that we look at that we might not be used to looking at?
Yeah, so after your bandwidth, really you only need to know two. Or I'm sorry, not after bandwidth. Really, you only need to know two. You need to know your frequency range, what it covers, and you need to know what the bandwidth, instantaneous bandwidth is. Now, the bandwidth is often based off of your sampling rate, but that's discussion for a later talk. If you just, and they're all going to advertise this much bandwidth, this much frequency cover. So with like the RTL, you'll usually see them advertised as 24 megs, 1.2 gigs, and 2 megahertz of bandwidth. So that means if you park your receiver at 145 megahertz, you will be able to see every signal from 144 megahertz all the way up to 146 megahertz. So that whole lower half of the 2 meter band.
Right, and so that's basically when you get into the software, how much spectrum you can simultaneously look at. You had used a really good analogy, is that a traditional radio goes to a party and can sit right in front of one person and only listen to that conversation, but an SDR goes to a party and can listen to every conversation simultaneously.
Right, and then later you go back and you can pick those conversations out of the room.
And because it is data, in fact, this is something I guess we should tell. So last year, Gerald and some other friends of ours were staying with me for Dayton, and our big impulse purchase of the trip was actually an SDR product, a product called the Hack RF1, which I think we'll cover here in a second. And man, we did all kinds of awesome stuff with that in the evenings, because at the end of the day, all of these signals are just coming to your computer as data. So that allows you to do things like record the data, play it back, do analysis later. It completely changes the hobby.
Yeah, so you just touched on one of my favorite things about SDRs is being able to record the data. A lot of people, when you say that, a lot of the listeners, their first idea is going to be, well, man, I can hook my scanner or my radio up to my computer, pull up Audacity or whatever audio recorder, and just hit record, and I can hear what I want to. But that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you can record that entire 2 megahertz chunk. So let's say you have, repeater inputs on, or let's say a perfect example. You're real big into 2 meter single sideband. And yeah, we all know the calling frequency is 144.2 megahertz, but maybe you live in paradise and there's a lot of 2 meter single sideband traffic going on, and you want to be able to see all of those. Well, you park your receiver on 144 megahertz and you're covered all the way up to 145. You're all the way out of the sideband range, and you hit record, and it'll save that to your computer as an IQ file. And later, the software like SDR Sharp and GQRX, you can replay that file and see all of the different signals. So with your conventional scanner, you would set it up for single sideband. You'd set it to scan all these frequencies, and maybe someone's talking on, 144.25. Well, you're not going to get the conversation that's going on 144.2 and hear that Canada is calling all the way down to Texas. You're only going to get the conversation it stops on. With an SDR, you're recording everything that's happening right there, and you can play it back, not even hooked up to an antenna or anything. It's a file that's saved on your computer. You can package that file up, email it off, and your buddy can sit there and play. But maybe somebody wanted to be a sneaky rascal, and they wanted to throw out lower sideband. Well, with this, you can say, man, what is weird about that signal? You can zoom in, and you'll see the suppressed carrier, and you'll see that the signal is off to the left-hand side, and then you just reach over and click lower sideband, and bam, you're decoding lower sideband 2 meter conversations. Just, that simply with a $20 dongle and free software.
And some free software, which we'll come to the software here in a second. So we've kind of covered the RTL SDR, like the bottom of the barrel, entry level, ubiquitous, buy 50 of them, who cares what happens to them, tool for getting into SDR. I know I could go crazy and go to the far end of the spectrum in amateur gear and go spend $7,000 on a flex radio, and we'll get there. But what's kind of the next level up after the RTL SDR? I bought into it, but I want something that has more capability and more features.
Yeah, and that's a perfect question. If we keep on the Baofeng analogy, the guy spent $30. He decided he liked it, but maybe he wants some different features. He wants a little, more rigidity, something like that. The next step of group that you're going to have is really the $200 range. I know that's quite a jump from 20 to 200, but the performance that you get is pretty impressive. So you have one device called the SDR Play, which is HF, VHF, and UHF. It's a great little device, and in fact, recently, HRO has started stocking them. So you can go into your local HRO store, pick one up off the shelf, and walk out. And I think it's right around $150. Now, the next one is probably my favorite. It's my go-to. It's the one that I keep in my backpack. I use it for all sorts of stuff. Is the AirSpy. The AirSpy was developed by the creator of the SDR Sharp software, and he wanted a hardware device that would complement the software and had a whole bunch of features. And it's got tons of features built into it. It's got a bias tee that you can turn on. So if you have LNAs and stuff that you want to send some power down the coax, you can do that. It's got a reference in. So if you have, a GPS time device, or you have a temperature controlled clock, you can plug that into it. Or if you have multiples, you can plug them into each other and make them coherent. Something we can talk about in a later episode. And, it's a VHF to high UHF device. It's a really good device. And a lot of people were adding up converters to them. And I'll talk about that as soon as I clear this. So the AirSpy creator decided, he wanted a converter that was work with his project the way that he wanted it to work. So he created what's called the SpyVerter, and it is absolutely amazing. It gives you the same 10 megahertz bandwidth, but now you can shift it down to HF. So you can really, spread that out and look at a wide spectrum of HF when you start talking about 10 megahertz.
So I'm looking at airspy.us right now, and I see that there's actually a new, like you said, a new version of the AirSpy coming out in the week of May 4th, and $199, and then the SpyVerter with that is $249, and that would effectively give you, the SpyVerter allows the AirSpy to do from 1 kilohertz to 60 megahertz. What is the top end frequency range for the AirSpy?
I want to say it's right around 2 gigahertz. Might be a little bit less. I'm looking here.
Oh, I take it back. It's actually the AirSpy version 2 is available in shipping now. It's the combo kits with the SpyVerter that won't be available until the 4th. Yeah, and that might just be like a what do you call it? Like a quantity or stocking thing. Because they're out already. He might have been sold out. So it's the base AirSpy R2 is 24 to 1800 megahertz.
Yeah, so right under 2.
And wow. This is that's actually pretty cool, all this stuff that comes with. You mentioned up converters, and we just briefly, but let's talk about them, because even on the RTL SDR side, there are up converters available from companies like Newelec that allow you to use these VHF plus receivers down in the HF spectrum.
Yeah, that was something I definitely wanted to talk about. The big one that everyone knows, or the SDR community knows of, is the ham it up converter, just like you would think it's called. And there's a few different versions. I think they're on version 1.3 right now, but I wouldn't quote me. First version.
I think that's right.
Yeah, the first version it was okay, but the oscillator that they used wasn't, it wasn't really the greatest, and it had a bunch of sporadic, or not sporadic, but harmonics on it. And it used a micro USB. It was either micro or mini USB, and that connector was pretty prone to breaking. The version I have is version 1.2, and they use the full-size B connector like you'd find on a printer. It was super rigid, and that all that USB connector was doing was providing power. It wasn't sending any data. And the way you would hook this up is you would have your antenna come in, you would run your antenna into the up converter. It would take, say a 10 megahertz signal. It would multiply it, X amount of times, and then it would put it into that frequency range that you could see on your SDR. So like mine has a 125 megahertz oscillator in it. So if I was looking at a 10 megahertz signal, well, my RTL that only goes down to 24 megahertz couldn't see that. But if I added that 125 megahertz mixer into it, now I'm looking at a 135 megahertz signal, which is well within the range and sensitivity of my RTL.
Cool. So that's the AirSpy. What else is kind of in that, less than $500 range?
Yep. So you have the SDR Play is about $150. The AirSpy, which is either $200 or $250, depending on how you go with it, and then the Hack RF. But I'm hesitant to say the Hack RF, but then I want to scream Hack RF from the rooftops because it's a double-sided device. It's actually a full-on transceiver. You can transmit with it. You can receive with it. Now, it is half duplex, so you can't do both at the same time. But, I say that, and the reason I'm hesitant is because people are going to think, oh, man, for $300, I can go buy a Hack RF, and now I've got a 2-meter single-sideband handy-talkie. And that's not exactly the case. The power levels are, really, really low. If you try to amp,
like 10 milliwatts.
Yeah, and that's dependent on frequency.
Yep.
If you try to amplify it, you're going to need filters. You're going to need, a bunch of stuff. And the creator of the Hack RF, Mike Osmond, you and I met him at Dayton last year, and I cyber stalked him at ShmooCon a couple years ago. I've met him, every time he's been at a conference that I'm at, I've gone up and we've talked, and he's not only a really awesome guy, but he's a huge benefit to the hobby, the SDR type hobby. He's written a lot of software. If you go to his website, Great Scott Gadgets, he's got some tutorials on there for a piece of software called SDR Radio. He's always given talks at, conventions and stuff. Like, he's a awesome developer, creator, hacker, radio enthusiast.
Yeah, in fact, actually, we interviewed him last year for Faux Time in our Dayton special.
That's right. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, but we had to stalk him to do it because he wasn't at the Tapper booth very much.
Right, and the reason is when you get into the SDR side of things, he has a huge following of people that are always pretty much stalking him. When we were standing there at the booth, there wasn't a minute that went by that somebody wasn't up there talking to him.
Now, the one things we didn't mention about the Hack RF are its frequency range is published at 1 megahertz to 6 gigahertz. And do you remember what its simultaneous bandwidth was?
So once again, it depends, but I think it'll go up to 20 megahertz.
Yeah, I see, up to 20 million samples per second. Yes. Right.
Now, again, so the reason this kind of comes back, with the AirSpy, it says 10, you're going to get 10. The RTL, it says 2, probably get 1.8, kind of depending. And the reason I start throwing in, the wells is because a lot of it is, also going to be based on your computer, what your USB ports, whether or not necessarily if they're 3.0 or 2.0, because all the devices we've talked about so far are just USB 2.0, but what the actual controller is, because right there, you just said 20 mega samples a second. So we were talking 20 million ones or zeros a second are going into your computer. And, a lot of the netbooks and stuff that are using low-powered processors, their USB controllers were never designed to handle that kind of speed and traffic. They were designed for mice and keyboards.
Exactly.
So, if you're wanting to use a Raspberry Pi, you're probably not going to get 20 mega samples a second, depending on how you're processing the data. But yeah, you'll get 10 megahertz, no problem. You'll get 20 megahertz with a good USB controller. And if you go to the Osmocom website, which we'll put in the show links, they have a listing of what the most recommended USB controllers are.
All right, so that kind of covers us in the most popular. And one thing I'll add is that the RTL is designed for another purpose that we're using for awesome purposes in amateur radio. The AirSpy was designed specifically to be a software-defined receiver, and the HackRF one was really designed to be a hacker's tool to be able to give you access to be able to play around with both receiving and transmitting. So technically, they're all software-defined radios, but they all have three, kind of different purposes. So I think that anything else sub $500 that's worth mentioning?
I mean, there are Tapper. We've said Tapper, the Tucson Area Packet Radio. That's what Tapper stands for, correct?
I will look. You go on.
Well, so Tapper has a whole line of devices that fit into the category of SDRs. The only reason I'm not mentioning them in the beginning, down and dirty SDR is because I think they're kind of out of the reach for your, intro level SDR. They're a little more complex, but they are powerful and they're great looking devices. So if somebody is already playing around with RTLs or AirSpies or something, I would go to the Tapper website and take a look at their project because they've got some good stuff that's in that mid price range. And,
I'll say that a lot of this stuff is kind of next level stuff. Not as much of it is out of the box and ready to play and plug and play and software, will just automatically work for it. But we, in future shows, as we bring other folks from the SDR community in, I'm sure we will dig into that stuff. All right, so this segment has gone long, and we're not even done with hardware. So when we come back, let's take a moment to kind of talk about the more popular, starting to get into the over $1,000 computer-attached commercial software-defined radios for amateur use. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
All right, we'll be back.
So the entire amateur radio community is excited about what may come forth from Kenwood in a few weeks at Dayton Hamvention 2016. But until then, if you're interested in some Kenwood gear, let me tell you need to check out mtcradio.com. They carry the entire Kenwood amateur radio line as well as the repackaged units. Now, I can speak from experience because I buy the Kenwood repackaged stuff and have had great service, no problems at all. You can't tell that it's not brand new in the box because it's brand new in the box. If you need some Kenwood gear from top to bottom, check out mtcradio.com.
All right, I'm back with Gerald, KF5, Just Not Unique, JNU here. We're talking about software-defined radios, kind of an overview and everything you'd want to know to have words to start Googling at the very least to get started. So we just covered kind of the more popular options out there for SDRs in the sub $500 category. There's several we didn't cover, like the Rockmite, or there's a company out there, I think it was like SDR IQ was an early one.
The FunCube dongle, the Soft Rocks.
Yep. So there's a lot of those out there. Then even older, there's things like the Hermes and the Apollo. We haven't really dug into that as much, kind of focusing on the ones that are commercially available today that have really good support communities or are fairly popular. So we've kind of covered more the receive-only or the hacker's tools. Now as we start to get into the over $1,000 range on the hardware side, we're now starting to get into some companies that actually build equipment specifically for the amateur community.
Yeah, and I think... because SDR isn't a new concept. It's not, as hams, we're not, like, oh man, we've got a lowdown on some new high-speed technology. SDR has been around in the commercial world for quite a while. It's pretty prevalent in a lot of, the microwave stuff, cellular stuff like that. It's just now that we're starting to get devices that we can play with as a hobby to make it popular. So a lot of the companies that make this higher end amateur radio stuff are also making commercial stuff on the side. And, the higher end stuff, is one of those things where, if we say the Flex 6700, we're going to tell you it's over $6,000, and a lot of guys are going to tune out right there. And, some people will never justify that much. And then I personally know at least 3 people that have justified it.
Yep.
So it's one of those things, it's kind of what you're into. I, was kind of like SDR Sharp. There's no way I would pay that kind of money for a radio. And then a friend of ours bought one, and I saw it in action, and I was blown away. I still haven't bought one, but I could understand why he did.
Now, before we get up to the almighty 6700, there are some QRP radios available for SDRs.
Yep. I think probably the most notable is the Eland Duo, FM Duo, or it's an Italian-made little desktop QRP transceiver that you can plug it into your computer and take full advantage of the SDR side and put it into software, or you can just set it up on your desk and tune around. Going price is $1,500-$1,700 on those, and I think they're totally worth it.
Yep. So the company is ELAD, Echo Lima Alpha Delta. And they were actually at Dayton last year, although I didn't get a chance to talk to them. And I know several people have asked us to stop by and speak with them this year. I don't have a U.S. price, but it's about 1,100 euros. So probably by the time you get it imported, you're probably right about looking at $1,500. Some of the other options, Flex still makes the Flex 1500, do they not?
If they don't, they're pretty prevalent on eHam and QRZ and other swap sites.
And so the Flex 1500 starts you off at below $700, and it's an HF radio, 5 watts, covers 160 to 6 meters, and 10 megahertz. No, that's for the clock. I actually don't remember how wide their bandwidth is. I want to say it's probably the 192 kilohertz, but don't quote me on that because I can't remember exactly how they're getting it into the computer. A lot of guys didn't like the early Flex stuff because at the time it had a lot of issues with CW keying. And from what I've heard, that's all straightened out and it's good to go. And, it's a CW's dream. But that's kind of, in reading through forums and other stuff, you'll find a lot of negativity towards different radios like you will anything. But that was one of the big anti-things against the Flex 1500 when it first came out. Yep. But that is an option to get started with at, below the $1,000. Now, the other popular major manufacturer, I would say, is Onan.
Yeah, Onan, Anan. I've met them at Dayton the last 2 years, and I still don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh, okay. So the company's name is Apache Labs. The radio is called the Onan.
Okay. If you say it's Onan, I'll go with you.
It could be Anan. We'll get that clarified.
I slur my A's. But yeah, it's, they make a few different models. When I first saw them, they had 2 models, a QRP and a 100-watt radio. Now they have a few different. They've got different A to C's in there, whether it's 14-bit or I think their high ones use like 24-bit.
Well, in the QRP radio, it's 14 or 16.
14 or 16.
Why would somebody care about what the bit depth of the processor is?
It's just going to be that resolution and the better the data that you're getting out of the radio into your computer to process.
Yeah. So and also it ends up, you wind up having the capability of having better signal to noise ratio, and like you said, more resolution generally also means lower input noise.
Right. And one way of thinking of this is when you're sending a sample, you're not sending. The way to think of it is I'm sending a sample from 1 to 2. I'm not sending, or let's say 1 to 3. I'm not sending actual 2. So the way that I find out what the value for 2 is I average 1 and 3, and oh, okay, there it is. But now if I sent you a signal at 1, at 1.5, and at 3, or 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3, that average is going to be much smoother. And that's what you get with the higher bit rates, the higher sampling rates, and so on.
So the Onin 10, which is that QRP radio, its output is about 15 to 20 watts depending on the band, 8 to 10 watts on 6 meters. But what's a really cool function about this radio, so it's, again, about $1,000. But, earlier we were talking about instantaneous or simultaneous bandwidth. So if I have a radio of 4 megahertz of instantaneous bandwidth, I can look at the entire 2-meter spectrum all at once. Now, the Onin 10 does not have that high of a bandwidth number, but they do start to introduce the concept of split receivers. Do you want to talk about that function a little bit?
Yeah, and that's something that was, it used to just be you had one receiver looking at one chunk of bandwidth, and you could split it up, but only at what you were looking at. Well, now they're putting multiple receivers so that you can look at different bands. So, say you're doing your HF contest and you're running, your contest on 40 meters. Well, you can have a whole nother receiver up looking at 20 meters, given, your antenna situation. And if 40 meters goes low, well, you're monitoring 20 meters that entire time, and switching over, given your antenna situation, is just a click of the mouse. And now you're on 20 meters talking away, and you're still seeing 40 meters, but you're on 20 meters. And you can do that depending on how many different receivers that it has.
And basically, that's one of the biggest, when we talk about the $7,000 Flex 6700, one of the biggest features it has is it has the ability, I don't remember how much bandwidth it is, do you?
I want to say it's 6.
Yeah.
Six different receivers. 6
different receivers, but you basically have the ability to watch 6 complete HF bands at the same time. And those receiver slices, I think is what Flex calls them, is, where the money goes up. So as your money, as the price of these things go up, the capabilities you're getting are, effectively lower noise sampling in the processors in the boxes, the ability to have multiple slices so you can look at different parts of the received spectrum at the same time, and then more bandwidth overall so you can look at larger slices of bandwidth at the same time.
Yep.
So I'm going to, since this is kind of more of an introduction show, and hopefully we'll actually have some interview material from Flex and Apache Labs from Dayton, kind of hurrying us through the end of it, or the higher end stuff. Like, we just covered what more money gets you, and both Apache Labs and Flex offer various levels of radios that, as you go up in price, they add a 100-watt transmitter, and then they offer more bandwidth and more slices.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to say about Flex is they're a hardware and software manufacturer. So if you go out and buy a Flex radio, you're going to get power, one of the 3000 and up series, not $3,000, but the 3000 series up. You'll get the Power SDR software, which completely works with Flex. You plug it in, everything works, you're on the road. So, that's something to consider if you're not a real computer savvy type person.
Now, that's a great segue, because we've really covered a lot of these hardware stuff, spent a lot of time on the lower end and the more affordable end. And earlier you referenced a lot of different great free or open source software packages, but at the end of the day, you can have the greatest receiver in the world, but if you don't have software that's useful or intuitive or powerful, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and that's the first part of the name is software-defined radio.
So let's talk about, a lot of these packages are implemented differently, but they all have some common features. What are some of the common features I'm going to find in a software-defined radio software package? So
you're going to, and even that's such a wide topic, and that's the problem with this, between talking from different hardware to different software. It's so wide. The first thing that you're going to want to do when you fire it up is you're going to want to find some sort of wide bandwidth or full bandwidth spectrum viewing tool. If you've ever used a spectrum analyzer or anything like that, you'll kind of have an idea of what the interface looks like. It's got a FFT or a waterfall going on, and
And
you're going to have.
Let's take 1 second, because if you've never seen a waterfall, what a waterfall is basically, like Gerald said, a fast Fourier transform display, and below that real-time, amplitude visualization, there is a field that, generally ranges in color from black all the way to red. And as the amplitude is higher, the signal, as it's drawn in the lines, go from the black-blue side up into the red. And it's called a waterfall because it's constantly falling down, in the sense that the history of what that signal has done is present in a linear fashion. And we will definitely make sure we have some links to some YouTube videos of waterfalls, because I don't think I'm doing a great job of explaining it.
Yeah. So it's a visual representation. If I'm sitting there with a radio and I'm just keying, unkeying, you'll see that in the center there's a very bright color. And once again, it's software. So you can make that bright color green, you can make it orange, you can make it red. But yeah, most commonly it's going to be red. And when I unkey, that'll go away and you'll just see yellow. When I key up, it'll come back to red. Now, if I hold down the key, that signal will just be red. And the difference between the FFT display and a waterfall is, when I let off the key, it's still falling down in that waterfall, and you have kind of a historical view of a signal was present in this area. You can click on that waterfall, and it'll tune the receiver there.
I think probably one of the maybe this will help the most, but if you are down in HF and you are tuned to the portion of 20 meters or 40 meters where CW is going on, you can actually read the CW characters in the waterfall without hearing it. Yeah,
that's a good example.
All right, so I'm going to have some type of visual spectral display showing me my bandwidth and the signals that are happening there. What are some other common features I'm going to find in pretty much any one of these packages? What about, how can I listen to the signals?
All right, so you'll have usually some sort of VFO looking device. Usually it's a digital type display. You're not going to see like a knob display, but you could, but it's going to be a digital type display. You can go up there and click it around for your frequency. And what that's doing is that's tuning the center frequency of the radio. So earlier when I said if you tune your radio to 145 megahertz, you can see 144 and 146 with an RTL. That's what that frequency is setting. Now, when you see a signal pop up in that area, you'll click on it and you'll see in another part of the program, you'll see what your demodulated signal is. That demodulated signal in our example might be, 145.5. And once you get that, then you can start, looking at how you want to demodulate it. Do you want to use FM, AM? Do you want to do sideband? Another cool thing with these devices, and it's always kind of my fallback, is I tune it down into the FM broadcast band, select, a wideband FM stereo demodulator, start demodulating, and all of these software packages have a RDS decoder built in. So if you're in your car and you see, the name of the song or the radio station that's playing, all of the software can pick that out. And in fact, if you zoom in on the signal, you can actually see where that data is being encoded in the audio. So you'll see a giant peak, you'll see a couple modulating signals off it, and you can see that little data signal in there. So, you'll have different options for that if you want, to see RDS, if you want to do AM, and that's kind of your demodulated space. And then usually you'll have a window that displays the audio frequency out. So once you have that signal demodulated, it'll be another type of spectrograph that shows the audio actually coming out of that signal.
That's awesome. And of course, along with that, these packages are going to have all of, on a ham radio, we're used to our noise blankers and our passband tuning and our filters. And I think it's safe to say all these packages have that functionality.
Oh, yeah. You've got LNAs and noise blankers, the whole 9 yards, because all that stuff is doing is just applying some sort of process to the signal. And here, instead of doing it, through circuitry or microprocessors on the radio. We're just doing it in software on the computer.
Sorry, I thought I was muted. Yes, and the cool thing about that is that the software filters are really good.
Yeah, and you can, you can pull your filter out if you're listening to, a single sideband HFQ. So you can set it at 2. You can set it at 2.5 kilohertz. You can set it at 3 kilohertz. Maybe it's some guys running ESSB. You can set it 4, 5 kilohertz. You can set whatever you want because it doesn't care. It's just going to apply the mathematical process on whatever signal you tell it to.
So what are some other, that's how I see my signal, how I decode and manipulate the audio of my signal. What are some other common features I'm going to find in these packages?
Well, so those, your SDR Sharp, your GQRX, SDR console, those are going to be signal discovery type tools. They're going to be able to show you the bandwidth. You're going to be able to see a signal, click on a signal, apply a couple demodulators to it, find out, what kind of modulation it is, and then you can use another type of program to start, and if you're just wanting to listen to AM, FM, that's fine. But there's a whole number of other programs that if you want to get into, we can talk about of what to do once you've discovered that signal.
Yeah, and I think that'll be beyond the scope of today's episode, but I would love to come back and talk about that because, for instance, one of the things that we had our HackRFs doing last year after Dayton was decoding D-Star.
Yep, D-Star, ADS-B off of aircraft, AIS off of ships. In fact, I remember at your house, one of the biggest things in the face that you made when we started decoding P25 with your HackRF.
Yeah, and I also remember I about had a heart attack when we keyed up a 5-watt radio within like 3 inches of that tiny little receiver.
Yeah, but it still works.
Yeah, it still works. It's fine. Rub some dirt on it. All right, and so to kind of remind us again, what were those software packages again? The Windows one, the Linux one, and the Mac OS one, and we'll make sure, of course, to have links to all of those in the show notes.
Yeah, so the go-to is going to be SDR Sharp, SDR with the Sharp if you're a music person, the £sign if you're
SDR hashtag if you're under the age of
if
18.
you're a millennial.
Yeah.
I was getting to that part. But yeah, so SDR Sharp is the go-to. If you go to the airspy.us website, he'll have a download link and all sorts of stuff. You can go onto YouTube, find all sorts of information on it. It's hugely supported. After that, my second go-to is GQRX. It's cross-platform. You can use it Windows, Linux, Mac. Works great, and it's awesome for signal discovery. And then if you're really into HF and you think you're just going to be mostly messing with HF, I would definitely take a look at SDR Console. It's a great tool for HF signals.
Now, one other piece of software I want to mention, which is Linux, which is one that you showed me and I thought it was super cool, is that there's even a command line utility that lets me tune one of these receivers and decode audio.
Yeah, in fact, on Linux, there's a number of them for just about any of the libraries. With the RTL, it's, if you're a Linux person, you install it with your package manager, and then you do RTL_FM. You do a switch TAC-F for your frequency, put your frequency in, whatever your modulation is, and then it just starts sending you, data. You can either pipe it into A-Play and play it out your speakers. You can pipe it into a program like Multimon and decode pager messages or APRS. You can do all sorts of stuff, and you never need to open a window.
Well, awesome. I think that'll kind of cover it for the computer-connected interface boxes or SDRs, and kind of a very, very high-level introduction to the software. Again, a lot of YouTube videos out there on these topics, and we'll make sure to have links because, honestly, talking about it, you're like, yeah, maybe I get it. But the minute you see this, and like I said, the first time that you actually start reading CW out of the waterfall, like it just clicks. So when we come back, we'll kind of shift focus from the computer-connected stuff, talk a little bit more about the standalone SDRs, because this is an area where I expect there to be a lot of new products coming out. I mean, ICOM actually has a radio that's very hot right now that is a standalone radio, and we'll talk about it when we come back.
Yeah, so, the Ham Fest schedule is wide open. I mean, it seems like there's 2 or 3 every weekend that everybody wants to go to this time of year. So be on the lookout for BOLO for our friends Tim and Ron from BridgecomSystems.com. They're hitting the big ones, they're hitting the small ones, but most importantly, they're there to connect you with their 220 megahertz amateur radio gear. If it's a repeater, handy-talkie, if it's a mobile, they've got you covered. Check them out at BridgecomSystems.com today.
All right, folks, it's Jeremy KF7IJZ back with Gerald KF5JNU. We've talked about the computer interface boxes. We've talked a little bit about software. We've gone on and on and on and on about how the RTL SDR dongle is the best $25 you can spend. And I feel kind of bad because we are literally just scratching the surface with all this, and we're going over more time than we had allotted, but we're still not even getting close. And that's why there's going to be a series of these episodes. So as we go into the last segment here, I wanted to, I saw a piece of, news that I thought was really cool. So ICOM's IC7300, which is I think I'm going to be safe in calling it the first-software-defined amateur radio product from the big three. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's the first, breaking the barrier type radio.
I mean, and some radios had IQ outputs available to them, but I mean, I'm pretty sure like the Yaesu FT3000DX doesn't, or FTDX3000 doesn't have like a direct conversion receiver in it or anything. I know it has like the ability to output IQ data, which we'll deeper dive into a future episode, but that's the type of like radio signal data that the computer is manipulating and calculating on. But the IC7300, when it was announced, it's amazing because they have the screen, they have all the knobs, they have the classic filtering and noise blanking and DSP, noise reduction, and all the features that amateurs have come to expect from their ICOM radios. But it's a software-defined radio.
Yeah, and it's the thing that I like about it, and as a recent ICOM guy, is their approach to it. They knew that they wanted an SDR and they wanted all the performance, but they also wanted to appeal to the conventional radio guys who still wanted to have access to, their receive and tune controls, their noise blanker controls and all that. But they didn't just stick an SDR in a box. Even with the display, and ICOM's always been known for their displays, they incorporated a lot of the common SDR GUI features that you'll find on a computer with like SDR Sharp and stuff. They have it in there. You can tune around. You see the waterfall. You see the spectrum. You've got touchscreen controls. It's really I don't want to say game changer because I think that word gets overused, but I think it's an advancement in what we're going to see as radios.
Can I say it's never been done before?
Never been done before. I don't know. I don't think either of you or I are French Creole enough to be saying that.
No, it's actually really cool. But the reason I'm leading with this topic, even though it's not our favorite SDR, do you want to hear something amazing?
What is that? Blow my socks off.
So, are you familiar with the Sherwood Engineering receiver test list?
Yep. So
I'm not going to get into the debate about whether or not this is really the best way of measuring receiver performance, because
it's like cronying a pistol or a rifle,
Yeah. I mean,
is that the best test? No, but it gives you some very good data to go off of to make your purchase.
And for a while, the KX3 used to be the second best radio on the list, and since then it's now down at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But they just added the 7300 to the Sherwood list, and do you know what spot it came in at? Don't look it up.
2 or 3.
No,
I'm not looking it up.
Not that good. Because the radios that are in the top 3 are all, 4, 5, 10,000.
Well, yeah. What's the German one that's always at the top?
The Hilberling, but actually even the Hilberling is number 5 below the ICOM 7851 and the K3S.
No way.
Oh yeah. And actually, the Flex Radio 6700 is at the top of the list, but that's not what we're talking about. The exciting thing is the 7300 is number 12.
Wow. So it's what's its going price? What's its street price right now?
Its street price, because it's still a new radio, is $14.95, and I expect that we're going to see some deals on that at Dayton. But so the Darling,
and what's the street price on a K3S?
Well, I mean, that's harder because it depends on what filters you want. I think for the 100-watt version, you're probably at about $2,000, but then you have a lot more expandability. I don't think it's fair to compare the 7300 to a K3S, because the K3S is it is more modular. It's designed to grow as you grow. The 7300 is an appliance that you're meant to grab, throw in a box or set on your desk, and you're done. But the reason this is so amazing is that the darling of Dayton for the last 2 years, as far as the good deals available and the best performance for the money, was the Kenwood TS590 SG.
Yeah, that's so many guys have gotten into it. It's a great radio with built-in sound card, built-in USB rig control. It's been a huge, and I don't think I've heard anyone that hasn't been, a fan of the receiver.
And now you're looking at the 7300 has pushed it down. The first mode of the SG is now in spot 14. And so you have a radio in about the same price range. But as much as I love Kenwood, and I myself have kind of become an ICOM fanboy over the last several years, despite the fact I've had some issues with them. I've called them out for Dayton. I don't understand why 1,000 is still a limit in the year 2016 for anything, but besides the point. But they're now I think they're going to start eating Kenwood's lunch on this, because which radio would you rather have? That nice big LCD with the choice of 2 backlights, or a waterfall that gives you 200 kilohertz of spectrum, the ability to touch and zoom and, do audio analysis and have a waterfall and even do RIDI decoding? Which radio would you choose?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you were to put it in front of, a non-ham, take it to work and set it on the desk and show 2 people, given that performance is exactly the same, everything's the exact same, they're going to choose the ICOM because, the display is, like you said, it's 2016. Why do we still have, LCD colored, green or orange? Like, how are those the only 2 options that we have? Seeing the different signal strengths, being able to see, have a color change for a different setting that you're in, like, that's a big thing. And it, is it that bad? Like, people were operating Drakes without any colored display, but their displays have made such a big difference. Being able to touch and make changes, being able to see what you're manipulating with your knobs is a huge, huge benefit. So even if performance is the same, just the display on the ICOM's enough to make me choose it.
Oh, yeah, and you're a recent 7100 owner, and I've had one since the first batch that landed in America. And, I did a video on it on my YouTube channel. It was kind of a tour through the touchscreen. I didn't read the manual beforehand. That's how intuitive it was.
Yep. Amateur Logic did a video, and Ray Novak set down a 7100 in front of him and said, change the frequency to the 15 meter band.
Yep.
Or the 21 meter band. And they just started changing frequencies. He said, all right, now put it at 18 megahertz. And they did it. And the same thing with me. I plugged it in and I said, man, I really wish I could find where the button is to change the mode on here. And then there's USB at the top. And I said, well, let me touch this. Touched it, and it pops up all your different demodulators. I mean, it was amazing.
So I know we kind of gotten a little bit down this ICOM 7300 road, but I'm going to be honest. I've been waiting for this number to pop out because I've always been there. Like, for the last 5 years, whenever ICOM releases a new product that's not one of their stupid, ridiculous $2,000, $3,000, $7,000, $15,000 radios, I've always been for. I mean, you've known you and several other of our friends have given me a lot of crap. I was one of the first people to own a 5100. But, I was waiting on this one because it's a new technology. It's the first time they've done anything like this. And if they're scoring number 12 on the Sherwood list for $1,500 on their first try, I mean, I think I might be bringing one home from Dayton.
You need me to call the missus and explain it to her?
Well, we worked out an arrangement. I get to buy a radio and but I'm sleeping on the couch for like 6 months. That's okay though.
It's all right. Your couch isn't that bad.
No, it's not. So, I mean, we've spent all that time on the 7300, and it's new, it's exciting. It's going to be one of the things that's going to sell out. You know, every vendor, I bet you MTC doesn't go home with any 7300s.
No.
I know
Richard will be a very happy man.
Yes, and I know the ICOM booth will be absolutely flooded. I'm going to try to get in there for an interview. But let's not denigrate our old standby, our other hardware SDR, the Elecraft KX3.
Yeah, it's and that's a lot of guys are going to look at the 7300 and then they're going to pull up a picture of a KX3 and they're going to shake their heads and say, I don't get it. But we've said it a couple times now, I and Q, that's the data that you're wanting to get off of it. And the easiest way to do that, you've got to have an analog to digital converter. So it's coming off of that radio in analog format. Well, we got to put it into our computer digitally. And the best, easiest way to do that is with a sound card. So when the listeners are looking up a lot of these specs, a lot of the times they'll see either 192 kilohertz or, people just round it up to 200 kilohertz of bandwidth. And as an audio guy, do you want to explain that, Jeremy, or you want to say why that is?
Actually, my headphones cut out, so I heard something about bandwidth. I'm sorry.
So I just called you an audio guy too.
Well, I seriously, I bumped something and the jack for my headphones apparently is loose and I lost audio.
So why is it that, if I'm taking IQ data out of my KX3, why is 192 kilohertz a limiting factor? What device is going to limit me at 192 kilohertz?
Oh, primarily the analog to digital converter and the sound card. I mean, first of all, the amount of bandwidth that comes out of the KX3 is set at 192 kilohertz. Based on the technology they're using in the radio. And this really isn't different than like the Apache Labs On in 10 we were talking about, which its bandwidth is 384. When you're buying consumer or even professional sound cards, they are going to have a conversion rate. A CD is 44.1 kilohertz. Common audio is now done at 48 kilohertz. 96 is considered to be really high end, but 192 is where you're starting to get into kind of professional realm. And the more bit depth that your sound card has, the more of that spectrum you're going to see. If you one of the really popular sound cards to do this with previously, which the requirement is that it has a way of getting a stereo input, preferably a single tip ring sleeve stereo mic. But one of the first sound cards that did this was the Griffin iMic, which was a 48 kilohertz sound card that was actually manufactured for plugging into your iPad. But when you plug it in, you only saw 48 kilohertz of bandwidth. So that's why that bit depth, that sampling rate is really important on the sound card. The wider the sampling rate, the more bandwidth you're going to see, up to 192, because the KX3 actually doesn't make any more than 192.
Yep, and that's, you explained it a lot better than I would have said, because that's all you can buy on Amazon.
No, I mean, like on the professional audio front, you can buy sound cards that'll do up to 384 kilohertz. I personally haven't seen anything beyond that, but I know that those are out there. In fact, there are some people who use those and turn them into ELF or VLF receivers. Oh, wow. Yeah, actually, it was read into that. It was our buddy Kevin that is the one who introduced me to that concept.
Well, hopefully in the upcoming months, I'll be able to send you one of my eval boards that gets over this 100, not over the 192 limit, but it makes it easier for hams to use this, because right now that's kind of, when we talked about the soft rock and stuff, that's one of those devices. And with the KX3, that's a big thing is I've got a Griffin iMic and it works great, but it only gives me 48 kilohertz. And, that's all right. But I really want that 192. And there's just not too many USB sound cards out there that have stereo input that can sample that high.
And that's one of the things, if you're looking, a lot of these cheap $7, $10, $15 sound cards that claim to have high bit rates, on Amazon, you got to make sure they have a stereo input, a tip ring sleeve input. A lot of them just have a mono channel mic input, and that will only give you the I data or the Q data, but you need both.
Yeah, and now correct me if I'm wrong, but the PCI Sound Blaster for like a desktop, that's not hard at all to come up with, right?
No, but one of the things to be wary of is, granted, I don't know if it has a stereo line input connector where it's a tip ring sleeve connector, or if it has two independent, maybe 1/4 inch or RCA inputs. When you split the those signals off of the cable coming out of the radio, you have the possibility of introducing a lot of interference. In fact, that's actually, if you have a KX3, there's a kit of, or there's an accessory called the PX3, which the PX3 is effectively that sound card attached to a little 4-inch LCD, so I can take my waterfall with me. It's a really awesome accessory. I really enjoy mine, but the cable is kept as short as possible. The connectors are kept together in order to minimize interference, because it is such a sensitive, a sensitive sound card inside that box.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. I think you said there, take it with you. I think a lot of this stuff, not just the capability of being able to have all this SDR, capabilities to go with you, but to physically be able to take it with you and put it in your car or go backpacking in a park or something like that.
Yeah, because, you can take a Raspberry Pi with the official 7-inch LCD or one of the 4 or 3-inch LCDs. You can plug an RTL SDR into it, get it to maybe, because the USB is very slow on a Raspberry Pi, maybe get it to show you a megahertz worth of bandwidth. You can build that together, 3D print a case for it, and have something that's portable, but it's a fairly brittle solution. So, these commercial integrated radios are really good options if you want to be able to have something that is, sturdy and portable. Now,
they're going to transmit, which is...
That's kind of key if you're an amateur, right? You want to do
if
more
you're
than just listen. If you are an amateur shortwave listener, by all means, do the rest of, go the RTL route. Now, are there any other radios off the top of your head that are commercial amateur gear that are basically SDRs inside of a case with knobs?
No, nothing prevalent. I mean, we talked about the KX3, the 7300, that ELAD.
Yeah.
ELAD.
Now, the only other radio that comes to mind, but it's receive only, is there's a company out of Colorado called Com Radio. They make a radio called the CR1, which covers HF, VHF, and UHF up to 470, 480 megahertz. It does not cover 6 meters, most likely because that's where there's an IF somewhere in the chain. But it's a standalone, receiver. But there's no transmission. But you can also plug it in and get the 192 bit or 192 kilobit data out of it to run in any of the SDR programs we mentioned earlier to get your waterfall.
That's right. And didn't HRO stock those for a while, didn't they?
Yeah, I think they still do.
Yeah.
They sell. I will admit though, for what it is, it's like $600. And if it did 6 meters and did all the way up to 1.2 or 1.3 gigahertz, maybe it's worth that. But that's it's cool. It's not $600 cool. Like at Dayton, they usually sell for about $500.
Yeah, that's, I don't know, for a receiver. Well, I guess the fact that it's packaged in a box, that's kind of what this topic's about, is packaging it.
Yeah,
and that's small. And it's like you're saying with the cables, there's a lot of stuff to go wrong if you're trying to package, an RTL with a Raspberry Pi. Now you have two individual devices that can break, and you have the cabling and stuff in between that can break, or get signal leak. So yeah, there is a lot of issues that come along with trying to build your own. So maybe $500-600, we really stop and start thinking about what you're getting and the performance, because that's going to outperform an RTL. That's not a $20 receiver stuck in a box with an LCD. No, so you're looking at least AirSpy level, and there's $200 alone.
And I mean, the other cool thing about it is that it has a built-in lithium battery. It's rechargeable. It has a built-in speaker. I actually, if I remember correctly, I think it even comes with a little telescoping BNC antenna. I do have a ham friend, KJ4 FUU, who bought one, and he bought it at Dayton, I think, 2 years ago. And then he didn't use it for the first year, if I remember correctly. And we were emailing back and forth after the scanner episode. And I asked him, I said, well, what did you ever do with it? And he didn't respond. I need to follow up with him and see if he ever used it and what he thought of it.
Yeah, I don't think I've met anybody that's using one yet.
Well, that may be part of the reason why they haven't come out with a new product in like 4 or 5 years. Which
is sad, because I'd love to see more people take that approach and package all this stuff together into a good product.
Now, I think that's probably a pretty good jumping off point. I will say that the number of SDR vendors at Dayton last year is increasing. ELAD was a company that nobody had really heard of. They were located right next to Regal in the booth behind Yaesu last year. I feel bad. I should have stopped and tried to talk to them, because there were ample opportunities. People would stop by and thought their stuff was cool. But I think that they are really gaining momentum in the U.S. this year. I fully expected there to be 2 or 3 more SDR companies that we've never heard of. And the other cool thing is that, it's Dayton. It's new radio announcement season. We know ICOM was the first one, so they've set table stakes for what the packaged, self-contained, software-defined radio experience is for the other manufacturers. At least the other Japanese big 3 manufacturers. Actually, I just realized Alinco makes an HF radio.
Yep, they do.
That has now it has basically IQ output. I don't know that I would call it a true SDR. Like, I don't think it's a direct conversion receiver, but they do make a radio that gives you, HF spectrum output over a USB port.
But they're also, 2 years into the game.
Yeah.
Or 2 years before everyone else.
Do you remember the name? See, but that's one of the difference between the ICOM. The ICOM actually has, it's direct conversion technology, and it actually has like 15 different, bandpass filters in it for each of the HF bands. But it's actually, the processing and the decoding is being done in an FPGA in the radio. It's not like a traditional, what's the word I'm looking, not decoding, demodulating.
Demodulating. Yeah, I'm looking at it here. It's the Linko DX-SR9.
Yeah. So it's fair to and worthwhile to mention that as well, because that may be another good way for somebody who wants a nice field portable HF radio who has the capability to plug it into a computer to see the bandwidth that the radio is seeing. That may be another good option for folks.
Yeah, and I had an Alinco one time that I actually bought at a CB shop in town that someone had brought in and wanted it tuned to, be a legal CB, and something had happened. Anyways, the guy ended up selling it to me for $120, and I bought it just to resell. But I started using it, and it was a huge LCD. Audio quality was good. It didn't have any of the fancy features or anything, but it was a good radio. And I'm kind of upset that I overlooked this. This should have been one of the ones we talked about, because it's been out for a little while now. Mm-hmm. And I think the performance on it would be great for someone who's kind of interested in this.
And I'm trying to get a price on that, because when you think about the KX3 fully loaded with the amplifier to make it 100 watts, and then the other the pan adapter, you're at we figured this out once. It's like well over $2,000 with all the options and everything.
And then you just got to get the amplifier, because you can't have part of the kit.
No, well, and that's the thing is, you and I, you have everything except for the PX3, and I have everything except for the 2-meter module.
Well, I got you on something then.
Yeah, well, that's not, at this point, your like little portable SDR kit is quite impressive, and if you have pictures of that you're willing to share, you should send those along to Cale to put in the show notes, because that's another thing. You are a man after my own heart, because you are a case for everything and everything in its case kind of guy. And some of your organization boxes you had last year were just really slick, and everything was easy to grab. You had all your cable adapters and filters, and it was just awesome.
Well, thank you.
I'm still stalling to try to find the price of that radio.
It's all right. I can stall all night.
$649.
And I'm reading here that you don't have to have an external interface. It has a USB interface on it.
That's right. It has a USB port right on it that outputs the bandwidth. Like I said, I think it's 192 kilohertz, but I'm not 100% certain. something to look at.
Absolutely.
So I think that's going to do it for a good, wide overview of an introduction to software-defined radio. And I'm sure there's something we left out.
Yeah, and I think to, tease a future episode is, if the users, if this is something, or the listeners, if this is something they're interested in, go over to like flight24radar.com and look at those radar maps. And everything that we've talked about tonight, you're completely capable of hosting at your house. In fact, Cale has his own ADSB beacon, or not beacon, but ADSB receiver set up at his house, and he can see all the planes that fly over.
Yep, and what's cool is that if you're looking for a specific project of something to do with SDR, ADSB is the protocol that all commercial and private aircraft, I think private, is that right? All aircraft?
Not yet.
Okay, so all commercial
right
aircraft.
Right now it's commercial. They're trying to push it to all aircraft.
So ADSB is effectively APRS, but for aircraft. It's required that these airplanes squawk their identity and, some flight data. And there's a movement across the country where people are taking these RTL SDR dongles, taking specific software packages that have been written for their Raspberry Pi. You throw it in a box, you buy a $5 antenna, stick it in your attic, and it just is looking for ADSB traffic out of the air and capturing it and decoding it and sending it onto the internet to sites like Flight Radar 24.
Yeah, and it's, ADSB Exchange is the name of the one I'm thinking about. And that's one where, a bunch of people have just set them up and, they're all feeding into a server. So you have, worldwide coverage, but on, your own private network. And the same thing can be had, yourself. If, you live by, or if a family member lives by an airport, you can build a little package and just have them plug it into the wall and you're receiving. My longest one so far, I was in San Diego, California, and I got a beacon from a plane in Prescott, Arizona. And I've got a picture of it because I know no one will ever believe me.
I live within 10 miles or less of 3 different small commercial airports. And any night that I go out on my front lawn, I see 50 airplanes fly overhead. And this is one of those things that I should get around to doing someday, but I just haven't made the time for it. I think that's SDRs. There's one more thing I want to cover with you, though.
What's that?
I have something in my hand I think would make you super jealous.
This is a family-friendly show, Jeremy.
Indeed it is, but as we were sitting here, I looked to my right and noticed that I had received a package today that my wife did not tell me about, and that package was from George. And inside, not only did I have my date and credentials for the booth and whatnot, I have a brand new Pactena Mini.
Ooh.
And
on that.
Go ahead.
On the last episode, I bragged about the Pactena, and I still did, or I still do. In fact, I was just talking to a guy about it today. I'm getting to go on another business trip, and sure enough, 2 things I'm taking with me is a KX3 and a Pactena. And if I get a chance, I'm going to throw it up because, it's a whole, antenna solution in a bag.
So I chose to get the 9-to-1 random wire. It comes very well wrapped in some bubble wrap and sealed inside of a static bag. The construction quality is everything you expect from the other Pactena. The board is the really nice thick fiberglass. The BNC connector is well mechanically connected. There's a little S-hook in the line itself. And I have no idea what the random wire length is on here. But man, the fact that it's its own wire winder is awesome. I have the end-fed, like the PAR or the LNR Precision end-fed trail-friendly version, and it's kind of a box with a big mess of wire. This is really slick.
Oh yeah, that I saw when he released that. And I thought it was a good idea to kill a whole bunch of birds with one stone. Listening to his last, in the episode 50, and he was talking about how to match, in-feds to a half-wave wire. That might be the option that I look into because, his explanation of that really kind of got me interested in wanting to do some resonant in-fed antennas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, I had the option to choose either, and I may actually pick the other one up at Dayton. I chose this one just because the KX3 has a tuner in it, and this is one ready-to-go multi-band package. I can't wait to play with that. I also got some really cool Pac Tennis stickers, and more importantly, my Dayton pass. So I am ready to go.
Is it a press pass?
No. It's our booth pass.
Oh, well, you need a press pass.
Although they misspelled my name. There's an extra E. Actually, there's a lot of unnecessary E's, and we're missing an A that should be in there.
Well, between you and George, I think you're covered on the name wagon.
Oh, I'm not worried about it. I've seen plenty of guys at Dayton. Like, I almost think they do this on purpose. I've seen plenty of guys at Dayton who take Sharpies and draw through the misspellings of their names and correct it. The important part is that my call sign is correct.
Speaking of call signs, before we go, I just wanted to say one crazy small world thing. We were at Dayton my first year, and I saw a guy wearing a shirt with a fox on it, and his call sign was KA9FOX. And I kind of chuckled to myself because that's, close to a friend of ours' call sign. And so I walked up to him, shook his hand, and said, oh, hey, my buddy's got a call sign like yours. And he said, oh, yeah, I remember when I was putting in for that vanity. And, we laughed about it, and I went on with life. The other day, I went and sent an email on a guy at Swap QTH, and you get that pre-generated email back saying this, it's a copy of the message you sent. Mm-hmm. If you look at the bottom of that email, I guess the webmaster for Swap QTH is KA9FOX.
Oh, wow.
Small ham world. So maybe he listens.
Well, Gerald, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend an evening with us talking SDR and catching up. I got to be honest with you, I am really sad that you're not going to make Dayton this year.
Yeah, as am I. Yeah. I've tried. I've pulled out all my stops.
Gotta pay the bills. So,
yeah, it's not bad to be working.
Hopefully next year, if the booth is successful this year and folks like us, I'm sure we'll try to do it again next year, and hopefully you'll get out next year. You have to come at least once every couple years.
Oh, I will. You've also got to come down to Mino for the Mina Ham Fest in Mena, Arkansas.
And I got to come visit you out in the central United States as well. Yep.
It's nice and flat here. Long VHF comp shots.
It is, but you got that weird low percentage beer. But again, it's a family show. All right, sir. Thank you so much for your time. We will talk to you soon, 73.
73.
So that's going to wrap up episode number 51 of Ham Radio 360. Big thank you to Jeremy and Gerald. Yeah, thank you guys so much. That's just dipping our toe in the water. We're going to take this SDR thing as far as we need to go to learn all we can about what's out there for SDR radio and the amateur radio hobby. Again, a big shout out to our friends who gave to get me to Dayton. Most, if not all of you, have received your stuff. And those who haven't, well, we're still waiting on the printer to fix it, but we're going to get it to you really soon. Again, thank you so much for your support, your kind words, the tweets, the retweets, the Facebook likes. We're all over social media, and the best place to start is hamradio360.com. Let us know what we can do for you. If you have some topics that you're interested in hearing us discuss, let us know. We'll work to get it on the air. Until next time, guys, we really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you. God bless you, 73, y'all.
Thank you for listening to Ham Radio 360, brought to you by mtcradio.com. For more information about the program, visit hamradio360.com. Till next time, 73s, y'all.